Welcome to the Brewed Awakening series, sponsored by the Center for Justice and Reconciliation here at Point Loma. Anybody here from off campus? A couple people from off campus here? All right. Interesting. Welcome. Living off campus or from another campus, maybe? Are you all from living off campus? Living off campus, but not going to another campus?
Right.
Okay. Anybody going to another school somewhere? All right. I'm just asking to welcome everyone in. So most of us are sort of Point Loma connected here today. Welcome. I'm Dr. Jamie Gates. I teach in sociology and social work, but I also run the Center for Justice and Reconciliation, help to bring about programs that are consistent with the university and the center's mission. The center's mission is to study poverty and oppression and teach Christian means of social engagement. And the Brewed Awakening series, the official title is Brewed Awakening, serving fair trade coffee, tea, and speakers to stir the social conscience. Our speaker tonight is Kevin Malone. He's a good friend, and he has worked with us many times in the past. Many of our students have worked with the San Diego Organizing Project. He's going to tell you all about that tonight. I'm excited that he's here. You've heard a lot about organizing and community organizing in the news these days. If only just watching some of the presidential debates and so on. One of our presidential candidates was a community-based, faith-based community organizer. So if you don't have any idea what that's all about, you're going to learn what that's all about tonight. So welcome tonight. And a few other mentions. Out on the table out there, you'll be able to find a list of all the Brewed Awakenings for the semester, for this fall. Please pick one of those up, and you'll be able to kind of plan ahead a little bit. Secondly, we'll be advertising sort of mid-semester. The spring and summer of next year, we're doing a study abroad to South Africa. We are teaching the courses in such a way that you'll take a course in the spring and it'll flow into the summer. It'll be 2 courses altogether with a study abroad component to it at the end of the semester. The 2 courses, one is the history of Christianity in South Africa, and it has in the past and likely will again count for Christian tradition. And the second course is called Race and Ethnicity in Comparative Perspective, the U.S. and South Africa. So we're looking at the race, it's an interdisciplinary course, looking at the race and history and politics, looking at the history and the politics of race in South Africa and the United States. So you'll be hearing more about that down the road here. One other thing, Kevin Malone here tonight helped us out real big this summer. Every other summer, on opposite summers, the CJR runs the Urban Term, and there's some students in here who have been involved in Urban Term before, which is an immersion in City Heights. It's a 10-credit course that some of you will want to plan for in the future. Come and talk to me about that. But there's some brochures for that out on the table. All right, these are interesting days, and tonight we've asked Kevin Malone to join us. Kevin is going to tell you a little about his own story tonight and a lot about the organizing that's going on in the city through the San Diego Organizing Project. This is their Year of the Youth, and so there's a particularly strong emphasis on what can be done in our city for young people, and particularly young people in the margins. So Kevin, I'd like to welcome, how about we all welcome Kevin?
Jamie forgot to mention that and maybe he's nicer than I am, that there's an intern working with me now. Maddie has been interning at SDOP over the summer and is working, so that now obviously many of you are here because she got you here, which is part of the function of organizing. So I tell people these days that I do what Barack Obama used to do and what he got too tired of because the work was too hard. He went on to something easier. And I don't, yeah. Maybe not easier. That was a joke. Thanks. So, how many of you have heard of community organizing? Yeah, Jamie. Okay. That's better than 5 years ago. 5 years ago, probably no hands would have raised, unless you're an academic or an organizer. We've kind of lived under the radar screen. And I came to organizing, well, this kind of organizing, kind of in a circuitous way. I finished college and I went to Africa and was in the Peace Corps. And Sierra Leone. And I was there for 3 years, and I began to learn about Paulo Freire-based community development work. Anybody, Paulo Freire, anybody reading that? No? Okay, that's all right. So in the southern half of the globe, much of the good work that's happening is called community development work. And it's based, the good stuff is based on the work of Paulo Freire, who wrote a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I moved from Africa and spent about a decade in Cambodia, working with a Buddhist monk and a Jesuit and a Jewish woman to build a nonviolent movement for peace. So I'm trying to show you the way I got to where I am. I started in Africa in community development. I went on to help build a nonviolent movement for peace that basically what we did every year in Cambodia is we organized a peace march. And we would walk into the war zone. Every dry season there would be a flare-up and the war would start, and 1,000 monks and nuns would try and walk into it. And we believe that we had a lot to do with ending the war in Cambodia. But I then came back to this country, having never lived here after college, and had no idea what I was going to do. But I knew that it involved faith, that it involved change, it involved justice, and it involved people. And I knew that that was the recipe for me, that it had to involve those things. How can people get involved in shaping their own futures and shaping their own history, and not sit back and let it be done unto them? And I had learned how to do that in Africa and in Cambodia, but I didn't know if it existed here. So I came back and started listening, which is at the very heart of what organizing is. I did what I did in Africa. We moved back, we ended up in San Jose, and I just started listening to people to find out what was happening and who was doing good work. And I kept hearing about this group up there called PACT, People Acting in Community Together. And eventually I went and met with the executive director of that group and heard about what they were doing. And as I listened to this organizer and later the director, I was like, well, that's what I do. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. And came to discover that there was probably about a 30-year history of this kind of faith-based organizing in this country. And I was intentionally looking for it, and I had never heard of it. And I hadn't lived in this country in a long time, so I wasn't in the know. But it still took me 6 months to find an organization that was doing what I knew I wanted to do. PACT is a part of this network of this family of organizations that is called PICO, People Improving Communities Through Organizing. That's been around for around 30-some years now. Got its start in Oakland, moved out from there. In the state of California, we have about 20 sister projects. And across the country, we have about 50. And PICO is one of probably 4 big networks that do this kind of organizing, this kind of putting faith into action. And still, most people haven't heard of it. And when Sarah, is that her first name? Palin? That's her first name. When she made that comment at the Republican convention, I don't know if any of you heard it, there's an op-ed back there that we got placed in the paper today. I got to tell you first about this. There's this great button going around. It said, Jesus Christ was a community organizer, Pontius Pilate was a governor. I'm getting that button. She basically said that, the quote was something like, being a mayor is a lot, or governor is being a lot like an organizer, except for you have responsibilities. And for those people, I mean, she insulted sort of their estimates around maybe 20,000 community organizers in the country. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because community organizers work with people. And in just in San Diego, we have 30 member churches representing about 40,000 families. So just here, she insulted 40,000 families directly. And part of me was thinking, that was stupid. And the other part was, man, we can't react to this because it's so vile. It doesn't deserve a response. But then the next day, I got going on and off, and we got it in the paper today. So you can look at that when you leave. But where I wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit about how this kind of organizing began. So there's a guy called Saul Alinsky who was working in Chicago in neighborhoods that were starting to really disintegrate. And what he discovered was a really obvious truth, that if poor people want to create change, they got to get together, because otherwise they won't be listened to. So there's two ways to shape power. One is you either got a lot of money and you buy it, and the other is you got a lot of numbers. You got a lot of people who are uniting behind something. And one of those two ways is how you begin to create real change. And he figured out if he was going to work with poor people that he'd have to focus on the no money side and getting people together and kind of develop the earliest form of community organizations. But what began to happen in the country was these neighborhoods started shaking up a little bit. He was working in Chicago with all the Polish in one neighborhood because they lived there. But as the century moved on, people started moving, and those neighborhoods, those monoethnic neighborhoods, didn't look the same. And so you couldn't organize people together, because at the heart of that was a common heritage, a common culture, a common value system. And so those organizers with Saul Alinsky looked around and said, okay, what institutions are left in the urban city that have a common heritage, that have common values, and there is some basic social capital, which just means people, it's a measure of how much people know each other, how they're related. And they said, well, it's in the churches. At the same time, the civil rights movement was kind of blasting across the country, came to its epic. Martin Luther King died. A lot of those organizers reevaluated what they were doing. And they said, we invested way too much power in one leader because he got killed, and much of our work dissipated with it. And they too said, okay, what are we going to do different? And I think it was the intersection of those people who said, you know what, we need a new model. And they started to create this faith-based model of congregation-based community organizing. And at the heart of it is this triangle. As Jamie knows, I work much better with groups of about 10. This meant that this is too big a group to do what we usually do, which is a lot of engagement. But this triangle is, when we work with people in churches, we talk a lot about the systems that drive our world. And we work with all kinds of congregations, mostly Christian in San Diego, but across the country it's interfaith. And so the world as it should be, I don't know, who heard, what's Obama's wife's name? Who heard Michelle Obama speak? A few of you? Michelle Obama basically did the very first training in community organizing in her speech. She talked about the world as it is versus the world as it should be. And the world as it should be talks about a religion that shapes not just private values, but shapes public values. It creates a political system where people have access, where your voice is heard. And a political system then shapes an economic system where people have enough. That's based on equity. It's based on stewardship. And since we largely work with the Christian Bible, you go into the Old Testament, it's just loaded and loaded and loaded with references for this kind of a system where religion is not just about your own private morality, it's about the kind of world that's being created. It describes the kingdom of God. Unfortunately, what oftentimes happens is the economic system does what to the political system? Co-ops it, buys it, straight up buys it. What does the political system attempt to do to our religious institutions? Marginalize, control, shut them up, silence them. And what happens then? You don't have a triangle. What you have is this. You have the political institutions and the economic institutions controlling everything. And those values get lost. Now, at the same time that this kind of organizing was beginning to emerge, Robert Tutton, right, Bowling Alone, wrote this book that looked at what happened to this country since the age of industrialization. So in the late 1800s, people left the farms and they were beginning to come into the cities. But they left, and they arrived with some skill sets that a lot of us don't have anymore. They arrived with small town mentalities, and they arrived with the hunger and need to relate to those people around them. And in the greatest age, you look back at every institution that was created to mediate between these two systems. Every single one, the NAACP, all the animal clubs, the elks, the moose, the eagles, all of those things. All of these institutions were created at that time, in part to bond people together, to build relationships, to create identity, in part also to temper the political and economic edges, to be in there in between shaping values. What Putnam showed is that from the 1960s to the 1980s, every one of those institutions dropped off by 2/3. Participation in those institutions is disappearing. Now, for those of us, even I'm too young for that, for those of us who didn't grow up with the Kiwanis and the Lions very actively, we don't understand what role they played. But they played a role in mediating here to make sure that there were some values and some common decency that was operating in their public world. They had a public role to play. And community organizing has emerged at a time when all of that is disappearing. And so the voice of kind of common, ordinary people at the public table has largely disappeared. And community organizing is trying to occupy that space. The ways in which not just religious values, but common sense and decency can be injected back into this debate. And that's what we do. And that's what organizing is about. And I mean, I talk about it all the time as churches this is just my view, churches ought to have and need to have a good show on Sunday, right? Liturgy. They need to be good at that. Oftentimes they do okay on charity, on service, on feeding people. But the third ring in a healthy congregation is some kind of a justice aspect, right? I lived in Africa. The story that I often tell is, I think it comes from Uganda, that there was a village downstream in the 70s from where Mugabe was butchering people. And the villagers woke up one day and there were bodies in the river, and they did the good Christian thing, they buried them. And they kept burying them. And then one day they woke up and some of the bodies weren't bodies, they were still alive. So they dragged them out of the river and they took care of them and nursed them back to health. And what happened is the village was being totally overwhelmed. It didn't have the capacity to respond to the level of need. And they weren't paying attention to their own families and their own farms. And they too struggled. Until one day somebody went down to the river and looked up at it and said, I wonder where the bodies are coming from. And organizing asked that question. Where are the bodies coming from? What's wrong with our systems and institutions? What are the root causes of some of the problems that our young people in this city are facing? And how do we deal with those? Another quote from Archbishop Romero that I use a lot. And they said, he said, when I fed the poor, they called me a saint. When I asked why they had no bread, they called me a communist and threw me in jail. And the organizing question is, where's bread? Why don't people have enough to eat? So I'm kind of gonna rapid fire through this, but I'll take a brief question if somebody has one. You're getting the kind of 3-hour introductory training in less than an hour. Okay. So one of the sources for, and I was saying this to Jamie the other day, there are probably two key theologians that a lot of us in organizing look to. One is Brueggemann, and what's his first name? Walter. And the other is Robert Linthicum, both of whom have really kind of described what we do. And what Brueggemann talks about, I think it's in prophetic imagination, might be hope within history, is the Exodus story. And this describes community organizing better than anything that I have seen. So Brueggemann talks about the first part of the Exodus story as crying out. That the people cried out. They finally got fed up. They finally said, enough is enough. And they cried out, but they cried out to God. And essentially, this is an internal thing. This is something that you do. This happened in our organizing model is filled with a set of principles. And one of the principles is the first revolution is internal. That the first time somebody takes a step and begins to act, and begins to think about changing the world around them, that's internal. Somebody else can be a part of it, but it's something in you that you take a step. Brueggemann says this, the next step is what he calls the public processing of pain. So our organizing model is built on listening. We get people in churches listening to each other. That's the most radical thing we do. We get people listening to each other. We get people sharing their stories, not just of pain, but of hope and vision. And this is something people do together. Right? You begin to talk about it. You begin to share. You begin to learn that you're not alone with your pain. You're not alone. I mean, oftentimes we'll do little house meetings in one neighborhood, and 3 neighbors will be talking about the very same issue. The drug dealer, right next door. But alone, they never did anything. But as soon as they started talking to somebody else about it, they began to see a way out of it. That you can't do it alone. And the third step, according to Brueggemann, is the release of social imagination. Now, in the Exodus story, what did this result in? They left. Yeah, they got the hell out. They said, okay, we're bound together, we're getting out of here. And this is something that people do as a group. It's no longer one-to-one. It's a group that together has arrived at a new idea or a new vision of what the world can be like. And they're not alone, and it can only happen when people come together. And that is organizing. That is what we do. We get people together, talking, listening to each other, imagining a different kind of vision for themselves and their communities. And that process transforms people, but it also ultimately transforms the world around us. The key thing is you can't skip any step. That they all have to happen. Each step has to happen. And when we work with congregations, we say, you know what, if you want a healthy congregation, this is what needs to happen. People need to get together. They need to share and listen to each other. And they need to co-create their congregation and ultimately the world around them. And the kind of kicker for Brueggemann is that, and he's talking about the people of Israel, believe it or not, I did the same thing with a group of like 100 Jews. And it was really intimidating because I was like, all right, I'm about to tell your story, and let's see if I get it right. They didn't leave. So, but that the faith formation of a people, the faith formation of the people of Israel required this. It didn't require people to go to synagogue once a week. It didn't require ashcloth or sacrifices. It required this. This is what made their faith real. Because it wasn't just something lived inside themselves or inside their congregations. It was something that was lived in the world. And I have seen this over and over and over again. If you gather ordinary people, and this was more of a learning from Africa and Cambodia, where I mostly worked with people who were illiterate. And we were working on globalization. And most people think illiterate people aren't very smart. Well, they're wrong. They may not be able to read, but they're not dumb. The reality is that people are experts on their own lives. And most of us, and certainly most of the people who work in the barrios in the neighborhood where I work and live, most of the social workers, don't mean to insult anybody in the room, don't actually believe that. They don't believe that people are experts on their own lives. They may have problems, but the outsiders rarely go through this kind of a process where they really create relationships. Because it's when you start to create those relationships that transformation is possible. And it's not one way, that you get transformed by it too. How much time have I got?
An hour.
An hour already?
So you still have.
Okay.
You're fine.
I'm on a roll. All right, so I wanted to talk to SDOP, I mentioned it, has been in San Diego for about 30 years. It's one of the older organizations, and we're mostly south of Dayton. But in the last few years, we've been trying to grow into South County and East County to grow an effort that's big enough to take on the county. And what we are about is this teaching and training of leaders in all of these places within their congregations. And I wanted to show a clip from a recent action. Jamie might need to help me. So within the communities that we work in, people tackle the issues that they're facing. It's all about people listening to each other and finding out what the key issues to them are. And so sometimes these local churches take on problems just that they're facing. So I wanted to show you a clip and then talk about it.
I'm Kelly Ryan.
And I'm Paul Bloom. Thank you.
USI News FM is live now.
And also they want streetlights to make their streets safer. I'm John Silverman. Have that story.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly Ryan.
And I'm Paul Bloom. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is the San Diego neighborhood that is plagued by criminal activity, but tonight, residents of the Stockton area have come together to say enough is enough. KUSI's John Soderman joins us live from Stockton with more on that. John?
You know, Paul, this is kind of an uplifting story, a story that proves when people come together, they can really make a difference. Take a drive through the streets and alleys of Stockton and you realize the lack of light is glaringly obvious. Residents say these dark streets are breeding grounds for criminal activity. In fact, serious crime being committed feet from a statue of Jesus. It's why they gather inside the Christ is King Church to tell city officials they want more street lights, plain and simple.
But do you feel your safety threat tonight?
Yes, definitely.
Hey, tell me about that. What way?
There's dark alleys, you know, dark alleys, dark streets.
From these dark alleys and streets, here is the crime water for the last 90 days alone. 1 homicide, 185 drug arrests, 141 vehicle thefts or break-ins, 59 vandalism cases, and 38 burglaries. It's why residents say,
we're just tired of it, you know.
we're tired of the violence.
Right, and if we don't give kids something to say yes to, the gangs will.
But these residents want something else from the city. They want more after-school programs for kids to keep them out of gangs. They say the Stockton Rec Center has only 2 programs during the school year, serving 150 kids per month, while a similar program in City Heights has 8 programs serving 12,000 kids per month.
There's a Star PAL program that the police department operates. We don't have it in this neighborhood, and we're going to ask for that.
What? These folks want streetlights, and they also want more after-school programs. What can the police department do to address their needs, sir?
We're working very closely with Mr. Ben Wesa. He's the one that puts together the programs to add more lights. We certainly support that.
By the end of this meeting, though, residents prevail. They are told by the city $168,000 of lights will soon be installed. And they hope that a statue of Jesus will no longer be a reference point for a serious crime.
And soon those lights will shine. Now, this issue with the lights is really a big deal. Here at 32nd and Imperial, just in the last hour, we've seen young mothers with babies in carriages, trying to cross the street here.
Probably 200 feet to my right, it appears as though there are some young men smoking marijuana. They're in the very dark shadows of an area in the trolley here that is very dimly lit. So this is really a big deal for these residents. They get these lights. We come here live from Stockton. John Silverman, King's Hours.
John, it's interesting because the police department has had neighborhood policing dating back into the 90s when Jerry Sanders was police chief. Who dropped the ball in this? They should see things where lights are out long before it becomes a problem.
Well, I don't know if I can answer who dropped the ball. I would say more it's a matter of the residents taking it into their own hands. They personally surveyed people on the streets and they compiled these crime statistics and brought it to the police department. And the police department said there was a direct correlation between the dimly lit streets here and the crime rate.
Now, it seems like it's taken them a long time. Thank you, John. We'll have to keep an eye on this because that's what they're supposed to spot long before situations like this happen. Thank you.
You bet.
This is News 8.
So, is there anyone shocked that there are neighborhoods without lights? Is that surprising to people? No? Some people. I've had a few people kind of remark on this that they just had no idea that there were neighborhoods in this city that are dark at night, and well, they're obviously dangerous, but darkness is a big part of it. We've been working for years in many of these communities just to get streetlights. But any other comments on that? Yeah.
I'm shocked that the police can tell you about that correlation and nothing is done.
Yeah.
They know it, why isn't it being
Yeah.
addressed?
Well, we are a low-tax city. That's part of it, yeah.
Sorry, what area is that?
Stockton. So southeast San Diego. Yeah.
That church is on 32nd and Market Street.
Imperial.
Imperial, sorry.
32nd and Imperial.
Just one major street south of Market.
It's also the church that started SDOP 30 years ago. I've just forgotten his name, but he was swept. This man was swept down a storm drain, drowned, and the priest at that time got together with other folks and basically began to create this organization. The reason I chose this clip is it has a little bit to do with our current youth campaign. You notice he mentioned Jerry Sanders and the community policing model in the 90s. That's something that our organization created. Now, when we're successful at our work, let me start out like this. When we're first bringing something forward to somebody in power, they either ignore us or they give us a hard time. But if we keep pushing it and we eventually win it, they claim it and say it was their idea. Jerry Sanders made himself a national name based on the community policing model that SDOP forced him to create in the 90s. And now, fast forward 10 or 15 years, we're in the same place. So that both the city and the county and the state and the feds responded in the 90s to a steep increase in violence, created actually lots of really good programs and prevention models. As soon as it was out of the public eye, those all got cut. And we find ourselves in the exact same situation again, hoping this time to create a model and a process that's institutionalized so that we don't have to keep doing this every 10 years. So I'm going to show one more video, and then we'll talk about the youth campaign. Yeah.
When you hear people all over the world saying we should overcome, whether it's China, South Africa, in the old Soviet Union, East Germany and Poland, that inspiration came from really 14 churches and a small group of people in a southern city that most people have never heard of. Most people have never heard of Martin Luther King before the March on Washington, and Birmingham was before the March on Washington, and the world has changed so drastically in these last few years. I'm not the smartest fellow in the world, not the richest fellow in the world, nothing about me or Martin Luther King was particularly exceptional. It was interesting that one of the college presidents that interviewed Martin for a job as chaplain didn't offer it to him because they questioned his leadership ability and they figured he was not a strong enough leader to lead college students. And so he went to Montgomery. I don't think all of these things are accidental. Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. It's my belief that there is a divine spirit, a Holy Spirit, that's moving in and amongst the affairs of men and of nations. And we think of that as the coming of the kingdom. And I think when you look at PICO organizers, that's essentially what they're doing. They're mobilizing deeds of love and mercy to make our communities and our nation more like the kingdom of God.
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and I have come to preach, to feed the hungry, to liberate the captive, to set them free. And in the PICO model, you have that to become a reality.
Day-to-day services, like masses and first communions, confirmations, keeps you busy there. But doesn't really help you address the needs of the community outside of the walls of the church.
Being out there, you find yourself being an activist and becoming rather worn out because an activist reacts to the situations or the crisis.
I was on a daily basis confronted by women who were trying to get out of bad relationships, people who were hooked on drugs, knocking on the door of the church. It began to be a burden on me as to how do I stop some of this stuff from happening around here.
I don't think just being a chaplain for the people who happen to be there is really doing the work, as I understand.
When I got involved in the community there, I began to hear, you know, you were probably blocks away from a Superfund site, a toxic waste site. Are you aware that the church that you're ministering at, no priest in the diocese wanted to come? I said, no, all of that possible, give it to me. But I'm here by the grace of God.
To speak against inequality and injustice, inequity, that's not easy. And one of the things I think PICO does is it keeps us from running away from that responsibility, that part of the calling.
That's one of the things that we're taught when we come to PICO training. It's faith-based, and so it's not any right-wing thinking or left-handed thinking. It's all about faith. And that we cannot be lukewarm. We cannot be wishy-washy about it. We answer to a large authority. Not the mayor of the city, not the governor, not the president, but we have to respond to Almighty God.
It's not something you jump into impulsively. And I think as a result of that, people feel really good about the project once they've chosen it. It's not that it's been imposed on them by the rabbi or by some outside organizer. It emerges out of their own deep thought and work.
You have to listen, you have to ask questions. And that what you don't understand, you have to ask more questions until you get an understanding.
I've always been an organizer and I've always been concerned about the community, but as a matter of fact, as I got involved in PICO, I realized I really hadn't been exposed to the particular discipline and methodology of doing organizing.
More than just the principles, more than just the theories that are thrown out to me. I said, what really cemented things for me was your success stories.
My question at the time was, does this work for everybody? And during that time, it all opened up to me about what community organizing was all about. And as I said before, I was an activist, but now I am a reformed organizer.
What faith-based organizing has taught me as a pastor of a parish is to never go into a parish and start doing things right away. I spent the first 6 months to a year just getting to know people and gathering up their dreams.
Because we visit in people's homes or talk with them maybe at their workplaces or at a coffee shop or something. we begin to get to know people at a deeper level, and trust begins to develop.
Out of that process, the issue emerges. You begin to see what it is that people are most energized about and most passionate about. And also where we are most able to take action. Where's the hole in the social fabric that the congregation needs to step in and fill?
Many pastors feel that they are losing a grip or losing power, not understanding that this process will help you further your ministry and the vision that God has given you.
The whole organizing dynamic provides a bridge for people from my parish to stand in solidarity with people of different religions, different races, different ethnic groups, different economic levels, and work together for the common good. Those bridges don't exist in our society today.
We are building an organization of hope in Metro Denver. Many people are concerned about the decline of civic engagement, lack of involvement in the democratic process, and the decline of trust among neighbors in our society.
The challenge for me was just saying, hey, there's a whole lot of people who are different. And that's what makes up this work.
The pain that comes into church on Sunday mornings in the lives of people, those pains are lived out daily. And again, it doesn't matter what your faith is. Pain is pain.
I get a whole different perspective on my own spirituality, my own ministry, my own faith, when I hear my Baptist, my Lutheran or Episcopal or Presbyterian brothers and sisters sharing about their struggles, their joys, their visions. It just enriches me as a pastor.
I had the chance one year to be the person delivering a reflection prayer at the beginning of a citywide action for a Protestant clergy woman to be accepted and supported by the Catholic priest. It's a good feeling.
In synagogue, people tend to listen very politely and intently to what you're saying, but they don't call back and respond to you. People calling out, amen. It sounded great. It felt great.
Before we get started, we need some diaper bags in the back, so if you have a child back there, you still have the diaper bags.
We moved beyond palliative efforts, putting a Band-Aid on a social sore, which is like handing out food in a soup kitchen. Very important things, but they're not systemic change. Things will never change in this country as long as all we're doing is handing out food to people. We need to look at the underlying problems that create the social inequities in our culture and our society.
Faith-based organizing can be confronted, but any relationship is confronted. Faith-based organizing brings the dimension of charity to the confrontation.
So we identified that we could organize around a series of concerns about the youth of the community. And we developed a strategy, a Together for Youth covenant with our mayor. Well, the mayor was scared.
Sometimes they have to make a lot of noise to be noticed. And they do that by gathering 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 people in the hall and calling out someone that they need a relationship with and say, here we are. Pay attention to us. Listen to us.
Finally got the mayor up there, and he signed a document out in front of before God and all the community. And he subsequently took credit for it, which we had no trouble with at all. We've been trying to make him look good for a long time.
The little ones just having a dream to see the schools could be better, and so the kids they get involved. Whenever we have the actions, they come and participate, and make the dream their own.
Fathers, if your sons want to sell drugs, let them know that they can go to school and get a degree in pharmacy. We have to teach them this.
It's also about empowering our people and energizing them and helping them to receive the skills and leadership training to understand that they have a right to be part of the democratic process.
In our churches, we have certain people who are designated as leaders. In the PICO model, everybody can become a leader.
The people taking ownership for themselves. They're asking the questions. They're the ones getting the training. They're the ones challenging city officials about concerns in their community.
And powerful people have lots of relationships, and it's just trying to teach the marginalized and the disadvantaged that they can also have power.
It's such a joy to see people who have never been leaders in anything,
be able to go down to the city hall and know what they're looking for and know the right questions to ask. To train people to be able to do that, that's a joy. It's good.
It's just excitement for me because I feel that, if I leave or if I close my eyes, I know that I've left stronger people.
Also, I've had really success with having some of the people that have been trained in the one-to-one process do pastoral care kinds of visits. They're not afraid to call someone and make an appointment to go visit them. That's something that's very helpful to me as a pastor.
Any vehicle that helps develop the gifts of our members is valuable to us. There are many pathways into religion. For some people, it's a spiritual focus. Some people are passionate about learning. And for some people, the primary focus of their Jewish lives is going to be social justice work.
So even though in an individual issue we may or may not be successful, we're always being successful as we call more and more people into leadership and involvement. And also, as we're listening to our people and they're saying, wow, the church cares about us.
To be a priest and to invest one's life in the process of ministry. It is worthy, but it's more worthy when this really touches people's lives.
So now when my eyes fall upon the Word of God, I see organizing all the way through it. It's like, wow, look at this here. Look where God organizes. Look how these people got power.
Now, we get the invitations from the mayor to come to every event that's going on in the city, and invitations from the governor coming to this summer house. I said, where did this come from? How did this all begin to happen? But it began to happen because we began to exercise the power that was there. As more and more congregations begin to do faith-based community organizing, the church can, in a very real way, kind of reclaim an important position that it has in society.
If America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom reign. When we let it reign from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
In fact, I think it's the only way we can truly fulfill the traditional teachings that says we must be involved in our society and we must organize together to create a just and holy community. It's only through PICO that I think we can accomplish this.
So to tell you the truth, that's the first time I've used that video in a college setting. It's actually designed for pastors. So I'd love some feedback. What did you think of it? What questions did it bring up? Or what struck you, if anything? Don't wait on these guys in the front to talk now. Yeah.
I think it's really impactful because as a college student, I'm able to see the leadership of our churches in a very positive light, where I'm living in a place of questions and about academia, we're searching for truth and how do we, it's so much easier to see the way that our churches have fault rather than to see good and great examples of leadership in our churches, all different kinds being very proactive, so it's really encouraging.
I'll let the folks who made it know. Any other comments or questions? What I'm going to go to now is a little bit on our current youth camp, what we're doing now. There's probably two main reasons why I made time to come out here today. Well, the main one is that Jamie asked me. But the second is that as a network, we're very, very interested in promoting the field of community organizing. So this work has grown actually pretty quickly over the last decade. But the bottleneck for us in terms of expanding this to more cities, towns, states, places, is people who can do the work. So we're actively, more so than before, kind of recruiting and getting the word out there. And that's partly why we've enticed Maddie to come and work with us. We want to expose people to this as a career. So if you have any interest in pursuing this, let Maddie know. But okay, so the context, let me see. Maddie, could you do the PowerPoint? The context for this is about 2 years ago, we started to experience in lots of our congregations an increase in gang violence. And in kind of the initial stages of gang violence, lots of graffiti going up and lots of sort of, you know, you can just kind of change it at will, and I'll try to keep up. This was actually a presentation that we did before the city's Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee last week. So we started experiencing this increase in violence, and as you saw from the video, after this sort of listening stage, we go into research. You can skip that. I mean, in this, it took 18 months or so, but I mean, we sort of began to understand that the safety net for young people in our communities was really taboo. Go ahead. And not only that, but that the violence was directly impacting our congregation. So we had Bishop Dixon buried 2 young people in a month, and Father Emmett at St. Jude buried 4 young people in the span of a month. And so we started working around it, doing local actions, march, kind of raise the profile of this issue, and started to learn a lot about it. And this is from, go ahead, there's like 5 bullets there. This is a San Diego Unified School District Youth Risk Survey. I mean, and the numbers are somewhat shocking, depending on how deeply you look at it. 14%, 1 in 5 had carried a weapon. And this is across the whole system. So you know that those schools that are heavily impacted are a lot higher. 10% were missing school, 10% threatened, 35% more of them. That's close to 4 in 10 have been in a fight. And then this one is just crazy, 20% considering suicide. And I mean, this is their own study, and they weren't doing anything with it. Go ahead. And then the dropout rate is shocking. I mean, we've been working both at the local level and as a part of the Pico, California project at the state level to look at the dropout rate in a different sort of way to get districts to really track this. But 20 to 45% of Latino youth drop out. 47% of Hispanics, go ahead, 18% of African Americans, 11% of whites. Go back once. Oh, you go forward. 281 African American and Latino males graduated in 07, able to go on with the basic requirements to go to California schools. That's out of a system that has, it's the second largest in the state. I forget the number. Do you remember the number? It's over 200,000. We found out at one high school, Morse High School, that 0 Latino males graduated with the requirements to go on to college, and 2 African American males. And then you can just skip this. The kind of drop, besides being wrong, the dropout rate has huge consequences. Lots of folks end up in prison. And what we kept hearing from families is that they didn't know where to go. They didn't know who to turn to. So you have a kid who's exhibiting some at-risk behavior. They didn't know where to turn, or they were told to go to 5 different places, and they got shuffled around. That some families had 3 or 4 different social workers and a probation officer, and none of them talked to each other. And then we sort of talked to our own youth in all of our churches, and 94% said violence is a problem. 70% worry about gang violence. This is daily. 62% no teen centers. We engaged over the course of 18 months, I don't know how many young people, not one named a teen center they daily went to. actually, not one teen mentioned a teen center that they knew of. Not one. And that's, I mean, mostly Southeast San Diego. We're mostly where the problems are. If you look at the map of the city, where the gang sets are, that's where our churches are. Most of the affluent churches don't know about us, and if they do know about us, they tend not to like us. Or, and I'm going to rephrase that. They haven't been exposed well enough to what we do. Go back to that one there. I wanted to, and these two here, everybody who works with young people, you probably can remember from your own high school days. We're talking mostly high school and middle school. It said if there were cool things to go to, they'd go to them. A. B. 80% said they wanted a job. And the whole kind of system that had been in place for after-school jobs, lots of stuff that we worked on in the 90s had disappeared. Lots of the federal funding for summer school, all that's gone. All of that has disappeared under our lovely current president. Go ahead. You had your hand up.
I was just asking you whether you have the same, you've seen some of the same kind of statistics out of East County.
Yeah, we actually just started out in Alcohol. I don't think we have the same data because we just started like a year ago out there, but I would suspect we're not heavily engaged. Most of the work right now, at least with the school district, is looking at San Diego Unified. I mean, long story short, there's the city, the county, and the school system are three huge bureaucracies that don't work together. We have been told over and over and over again, if you could just get the mayor, the county supervisors, and the school board chair to sit down, it would be a miracle. Well, it took us a year, but we got them to sit down together. And to tell you the truth, we got them in a room, we didn't know what to do with them. We just thought, okay, miracle done, that's what it is. We wanted to wake up and see it all done. They got in a room together, created a task force, but here's the reality in our city. Over the past 6 years, Parks and Recreation cut by $6 million. Police force ramped up by $120 million. So the money, we find the money for prisons and we find the money for police, but we don't find the money for prevention and intervention. So we're working very closely with the police chief now to change this, but the reality is that people in San Diego will vote for public safety, they'll vote for fire and police, but they're not thinking about public safety and youth services as connected, which they are. Because if you don't invest in stuff for kids to do, healthy outlets, especially in these neighborhoods where there's a lot of crap, they're going to get in trouble. And when they get in trouble, what we learn over and over again is that the kind of trouble they get into quickly escalates. The first time you get in trouble, you don't get diverted. You're on your path. You're on the pathway to juvenile hall. Yeah, the city doesn't know how much it spends. Just cut it. Go ahead. Here's the other kind of key one. We learned that it costs about $570 a year to create what essentially is a really good preventative program for kids with at risk. $570 a year. But it costs about $70,000 a year to incarcerate that kid. So we have the money in the state budget to put kids in jail, but year after year after year, the prevention and intervention money has gone away. So you can buy either argument. It's a lot cheaper to keep kids out of trouble in the long term, or you can buy that it's the right thing to do. We don't care which one they buy, just buy it. It's a lot smarter to keep kids out of trouble and it costs less. We looked at different cities. We can skip all this. And, I mean, cities that have created strategic plans to kind of deal with this. We're trying to get the city of San Diego to do that. It's not that complicated in some ways. It's very difficult, but not complicated. The people at the top in the school and the city and the county need to work together. And they need to make youth a priority, and they need to figure out how to work together. And long term, we need new money. Go ahead. We can skip this. This was just to bash the city council. A lot of our work is kind of raising contradictions. Long term, we're trying to get the city to invest and to identify revenue. You can skip that. You can skip that. You can kind of skip that. I just wanted to get rid of the web. No, skip that. Skip that. Get in and make a new one for you guys. This is the value statement. I hope the next one's in there. Go ahead. Oh, good, it's in there. Okay, so so the mayor agreed to create this task force and assign the police chief to do it. And we've been looking at what works all over the country. This may be boring for some of you, but lots of places have understood, cities have counties have understood that you can't work in your silos, that you got to figure out how to work together. And they mostly looked at it as a silo, but it's really, really clear to us that it's not a silo. It's more like creating a spider web. I think the next one's, yeah, it's getting clever. I don't know how well it works. So what's important is that out here at the top level, the mayor and the supervisors are saying this is a priority and we're going to resource it. As you move down the food chain, the people, like we're working with the chief of probation and the chief of health and human services, they've got to work together with the police chief and the superintendent. And then as you get closer down, you've got to have the people who are directly in connection with young people connected to each other. So the teachers, the police officers, the probation officers, the social workers, they've got to be connected too. Because what happens when this happens is that you've created essentially a community. You've created a new community that's surrounding a young person who may be heading down the wrong way. And unfortunately, this doesn't happen very often because these bureaucracies do not work together. And what's different this time around is that we're at the table and our clergy are at the table demanding that they do so. And what we're in the process now of creating a pilot project in Southeast San Diego that we hope can take this. So, if you want to go back a couple to that timeline, we're really proud of this spider web. So, we've spent 18 months kind of pulling this together. And the other reason that we're here today, and Maddie might be following up with some of you, is that we launched this really last year, but on Sunday, March 9th, we had a huge prayer service, 1,300 people, got a commitment from the elected officials and others to develop this task force. And on October 12th, we're having what we're calling the Year of Our Youth Community Convention down at the Convention Center. And there's stuff on the table back there, and a sign-up list if you're at all interested in helping. And this convention is about a couple of things. Mostly, it's about gathering our folks and getting a commitment from our elected officials to build that spider's web, to create a pilot project, to resource it, to heavily invest in these gang-infested areas. But it's also about voting. So 4 years ago, here's the numbers. And for those of you who know San Diego, there's a huge divide along Highway 8. South of 8 is one reality, north of 8 is another. South of 8 is largely poor, largely brown. North of 8 is largely white and largely rich. The other difference is north of 8, in the last election, 240,000 people voted. South of 8, 60,000 people voted. So who does the mayor listen to? Who does the mayor listen to? North of 8, 240,000 voters. And so our organization, which is largely south of 8, is working as hard as we can to change that reality. So we can pack a room, we can turn out 2,000 people, an elected official can say, who cares, you don't vote, right? So this convention is also about a commitment to voting and getting out the vote. Not entirely south of 8, but largely south of 8, to send a message to them. And then a couple of weeks of get out the vote before the election. Did I miss anything? So that's kind kind of it. And Jamie wanted me to kind of open up some time for questions. Let me tell you what's on the back table. There's an op-ed, a recent article, and part of the Year of the Youth Sunday is we're organizing, I should say Maddie's organizing a bunch of youth groups to do a march from Chicano Park to the convention center. And we're inviting all of you to be a part of that, and maybe even to help with marshals, like anybody from here that could come along, you could kind of maybe come early and help to organize that march. And there's a flyer there about that as well. Anything else? Yeah.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to reiterate something you said. We had to go out to the Claremont community and kind of assess what their major issues were. We went to a couple of the rec centers, and we were not aware of the issues that he said. After 9/11, the police forces got their money and they stripped Parks and Recreation. And he goes, we've seen the rise in gang violence. He targeted mostly underage drinking, but almost mirroring exactly what you said.
I'd like to talk to you afterwards to hear more about that part, because we're working with the Parks and Recreation. Yeah.
I also wanted to make a comment on how many the dropouts there are. I also noticed that in Claremont High is that there's a lot of people that just didn't care about school in general. We've got a lot of students I remember that they were going on the protest just to get out of school. And they had no intention of ever pursuing their interest whatsoever. So whenever there's an event at school or a ASB, a lot of people miss it.
Yeah, and I tell you what we're doing. I mean, it's really clear both here and across the country that the research is clear. By the 4th or 5th grade, most teachers can tell you which kids are going to jail, right? They know. By 6th grade, they definitely know. By 8th grade, it's abundantly clear and nobody's doing it. And so the way the police chief, who's kind of leading this process with us, talks about it is that we're working for the class of 2014. We're not forgetting about the kids who are in high school, but if you wait until high school, you're way too late. That they need to be engaged in middle school. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy that we know, or the teachers know, who are the kids that are struggling, and yet they don't have the resources or the capacity to do anything about it. I mean, one of the things we hope is going to come out of this work is the creation of these learning centers, these learning support centers at middle schools and high schools that identify these kids who are, and that's exact language, disengaged. I mean, it's not a mystery who's disengaged. That they know what's not happening is the academic component to bring them up to speed, and combined with kind of a wraparound social service model to find out what's really going on. There's a program in our county called the Community Assessment Teams, CATTEAM. 96% of the kids that get help by them do not come back. And that could be because, we hope it's because they're getting help. The data is pretty clear. But the county doesn't have near enough resources. We're just asking the county, like, okay, here's your program. Here's how many kids you serve. How many need it? Right? That's the question. Not how many you serve and how much money you got, but how big is the problem? And that's, they don't know. Nobody knows. So it's part of what we're trying to figure out. We did this very similar thing in affordable housing a decade ago. Every time we approached the bureaucracies, they would say, we have this much money, we can build this many houses. We said, well, wait a minute. How many people need houses? Let's figure that out. And then we can figure out the kind of resources that we need to get there. And that ended up in creating some new programs in the city, not near enough. I don't know why I'm talking about that. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Jay.
So maybe I missed this when I stepped out to get my daughter, but the preponderance of the churches that work with SDOP in San Diego, I think you've mentioned to me before, are Catholic. And it tends to be easier in some ways to get them involved, or maybe there's a deeper, history of involvement. As you said, the very first one here was Catholic, right? My guess is that you don't have a ton of sort of middle class evangelical churches on board, right?
Zero.
Jamie
and I and Kevin have been talking about this for a while. We'd love to have some.
Can you give your guesses as, your educated guesses as why that's the case?
Well, you have probably better guesses than I do. We've been around 30 years. We have 30 congregations. So that's roughly one. Some come and some go. So that's pretty dismal in some ways. I've heard people come into town and say there's over 2,000 churches. Why do you have only 30? Well, I'll tell you what, we got the 30 best ones. The organizing is countercultural. Organizing creates some tension for pastors, and it creates tension within congregations. And so that's one component. Another component is we got our start in the poor parts of town. So if you're organizing people around need, I don't have a job, I don't have lights in my neighborhood, my teacher sucks, my kids are getting in trouble, there's gangs on the corner. The act of getting people involved when they've got direct needs is much, much easier. Because you've got a very clear reason to get together with other people in your church and say, we've got a shared problem, and here it is. It's right in our face, and it's big. And then those people can help to put pressure on clergy and other folks within that institution to say, we need to do this. When you're organizing in a middle-class environment, I'd say our network and all the networks are fairly new at it. So we're probably not very good at it yet. But the other thing is to get people involved when they don't have direct needs is harder. Because the doorway to organizing is a faithful thing. It's not about, I've got a need. There are needs in those places, but they tend to be hidden. People don't talk about them, which is another cultural dynamic. But it's a kind of a faith doorway that allows for lots of opposition within those environments. And unless you've got somebody in that church or a group of somebody in that church, or leaders, also engaging with pastors and saying, you know what, we've got to do something. It's not going to happen. Does that get at what you're talking about, Jamie? So our history here is African American coaching. So Pentecostal churches, right? So big time evangelical African American churches and then big Latino Catholic churches. Now, they've got theologically very little in common in some ways. Probably less in common than Catholicism would with some Protestant churches and evangelical churches, and yet people work together. It's partly history, it's partly common interests. You know, that we live in these neighborhoods where there's lots of needs. But people have figured out how to go beyond those differences to work together to get stuff done. And I would hope, we learned 30 years. The first 10 years, we were just in the neighborhoods. We were creating, we were screaming and shouting and having protests because none of the elected leaders would listen to us. Second decade, they began to know us and see that we were big enough and we had enough churches. They started to listen. We started to do stuff citywide. We also began to move out of the barrio and the hood, saying, you know what? If we want power in this city, we can't just be south of 8. We can't just be in 2 city council districts. So there are 8 city council districts. We learned to count to 5 in the 90s. It took a long time to get there. But if you can get to 5 city council votes, you can get stuff done. Also in the 90s, we bumped up against the county. And our county supervisors, let's just say it like this, I'll say it nicely. The mandate of the county is Health and Human Services. They're supposed to be about taking care of people. That's what our county's for. They got some land use responsibility, but they channel all the money for health and human services. Our county supervisors is more proud of their financial, what's the right, stewardship than anything else. They have not acted in the best interest of poor families, and they still don't. So in the 90s, we butted up against the county supervisors, and we tried to get them to do what we wanted, and they just simply didn't respond. Each county supervisor represents 500,000 people. They're big enough to not listen to us, and none of them get voted out. 5 white Republicans, they've been there forever, they just get re-voted every time, no real opposition to them, they don't gotta listen to us. So in the 90s, we tried to get them to change what's called the medically indigent level, the level at which people could get free health care. 2/3 of the counties, maybe even more in the state of California, have a public hospital, right? They have a hospital of last resort, run by the counties. This county refuses to do it. This county could have got $17 million that we helped to arrange for children's health insurance. They wouldn't take it because it might go for the undocumented. They turned it away. That's the county we live in. It's one, frankly, most of our leaders and clergy despise on lots of fronts for what they've done for poor families. But in the 90s, when we had a huge action, 2,000 people came out. We had 5 empty chairs. Not one supervisor showed up. So we began then to think about how do we grow a project that's big enough to get their attention. And right now, both Greg Cox, one supervisor, and with Ron Roberts, they're at the table. Not because I think we moved into El Cajon and into Chula Vista, but because this issue is one that they care about. Don't know why, but they're here. Any other questions? Yeah.
So talk further about how you engage a middle or middle class church in a community whose demographics towards Southeast, and that has a very strong desire to reach out and engage Christ, recognizing that we need to start at the place of need.
Sure.
How do you engage with a church that wants to do that and has all of the has all of those
carefully. Because I've been down this road with a number of churches that ended up not joining. I don't know that I have a set of learning. I mean, first of all, the pastor has to buy it. Has to. I mean, you can get around that in some places where there's a history and a culture that's open to this kind of thing. So if you don't have that, it's not even worth taking the next step. The second thing is that we begin a really intentional relational process where somebody from the organizing staff will meet one-to-one with lots of people in the church and demystify it. Is this what you're talking about? Yeah, demystify it and sort of take the woolly hair off it. I mean, oftentimes when I do that, the little triangle about religion and politics and economics, that's stolen from Lincoln, by the way. In the middle of that is the prophets. And so it's the prophet's role to call out and call people back. And it's a prophetic role that organizing plays, I think. And oftentimes that brings up all of these issues, you know? I mean, John the Baptist looks crazy, right? Probably, and he ate caterpillars. I mean, he was not somebody you would want over for dinner. He created tremendous change. I think the organizers today are a little better equipped, or I think we're a little more polished than John the Baptist was. But there's no way to get around that. There's a prophetic edge to it that's going to cause people to react. And I think the better, and I've been talking to Jamie about this, I think our own kind of history has been largely Catholic and Protestant and not very evangelical. And so there's an approach all across the country. We're trying to learn how to do that better. And how do we approach the evangelical community in a way that doesn't cause that kind of reaction. And actually, at the national level, we're working a lot with Jim Wallace. Jim Wallace kind of wants to see his network and his base get more exposed to this kind of organizing, because there's so many similarities. And then I just say it's patient and slow. I think that, and Jamie and I were talking about it the other day, if you don't have a pastor who can articulate it and kind of be the prophetic, the wedge that starts to cut through this, it's not going to happen. It's certainly not outsiders. I mean, organizers who come in, we are fundamentally outsiders. We play a role, we're the catalyst, we help train and develop people, but it's the religious leaders within that institution that can open that door.
We have time for one more question. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, what he was asking. So if we wanted to bring this to our pastor, how would we go about facilitating that to get them in touch with you? Maybe my church might be interested in doing
Absolutely. What I ask people to do first is to approach the pastor themselves. And before bringing, somebody else in. Because I think pastors, and I've worked with lots and lots of them, they trust their own people a lot more than they trust anybody else. And so when people from their own church are coming in and saying, you know what, I'm interested in this, I'd like to pursue it. A, it takes some of the fear out for the pastor, and B, the pastor understands that they're not going to have to do all the work. If there's a group of folks within the church that say, you know what, we like this and we're going to do it, it's a lot easier for the pastor to kind of say, okay, I'll take that, I'll take a step. And then it's usually, this is a lot of detail, but it's usually like a 3 to 6 month process of just getting to know each other. We never rush it, because what we're looking for as an organization are long-term relationships, that we're in it for the long haul.
As you have heard, there is material at the back. The website is on your flyer for SDOP. Maddie is here on campus. She's going to be twisting your arm and coming around and saying, please join, help us out, help us find churches, help us sign up. Maddie, did you want to say anything first?
I have a comment. We are also, or I am also, organizing the group from USD to volunteer at the actual October 12th event. So if you're interested in that, it'll probably be registration stuff or get out the vote. Hopefully you have a list or something.
Yeah, there are sign-up sheets back there. If you're at all interested in being in on the loop, please sign up, and we'll send you emails. And Maddie might test you.
Come to the October 12th. It's gonna be amazing. It'll be really, really cool. And come to March, because we're excited.
Thanks for coming tonight. I'll see you at the next Brewed Awakening.